My husband and I went to view a condo owned by a foreign seller. I remained completely silent, pretending not to understand a single word of German. Then I heard one particular phrase that made me freeze in disbelief, unable to process what my ears had just registered. Kesha quietly closed the bedroom door behind her and retrieved a well-worn textbook from its hiding place beneath a stack of neatly folded bed linens. The pages were filled with her careful handwriting, colorful bookmarks protruding from various sections like flags marking her progress. She switched on the desk lamp, adjusting it to its dimmest setting so no telltale glow would seep beneath the door, and opened her exercise notebook with practiced stealth. From the living room, the television blared loudly. Marcus was engrossed in yet another football game, and she knew from experience that he wouldn't disturb her for at least the next 2 hours. This clandestine routine had been her secret ritual for 8 months now. Every evening when her husband worked late or became absorbed in his own entertainment, Kesha would settle down with her textbooks. What had started as mere curiosity, sparked by an advertisement for free online foreign language courses that had appeared on her social media feed, had transformed into something much more significant. She found herself drawn into this new world, discovering an unexpected joy in learning something completely new, feeling her mind expand and engage in ways it hadn't in years. She relished the sensation of words gradually forming into coherent sentences, of slowly beginning to comprehend a language that had once seemed utterly foreign and impenetrable. It was like solving an intricate puzzle, except far more thrilling and personally rewarding. But she had told Marcus absolutely nothing about it, and she had no intention of doing so. 2 years earlier, when she had enthusiastically mentioned wanting to take floral design classes, he had laughed so dismissively, so cruelly, that her desire had withered away like an unwatered plant. "Kesha, you do realize that's not a serious pursuit, right?" he had said at the time, not even bothering to look up from his tablet screen. "You'll waste money, attend for maybe a month, and then quit just like you always do." "I haven't quit everything just like always," she had tried to object, her voice small and defensive. "I just want to try something new, something for myself." "New?" He had chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "You have a new hobby every month. First it was yoga, then painting, then some other nonsense I can't even remember. You'd be better off focusing on taking care of the house properly." She had remained silent then, but the resentment had settled deep inside her, taking root like a bitter seed. 6 months later, when she had worked up the courage to mention signing up for those yoga classes after all, he hadn't even let her finish her sentence before starting up again with the same tired arguments. "We don't have money to waste on nonsense. Do you even realize how much utilities cost these days? How much everything costs?" Since that day, Kesha had stopped sharing her desires, her dreams, her aspirations with him entirely. What was the point if he wouldn't take them seriously anyway? It was as if she had become invisible in her own home, a ghost haunting the rooms of her own life. Marcus decided where they went on vacation, what furniture to buy, when to invite guests over, what they would eat for dinner. She cooked, cleaned, agreed to his decisions, and occasionally attempted to voice an objection, but he would wave her off dismissively. "I know better. You don't understand these things. Let me handle it." And Kesha would retreat, time after time, until she had grown accustomed to being merely a shadow in her own existence. She poured herself some tea from a thermos she had specifically brought into the bedroom, a small act of rebellion that allowed her to avoid going to the kitchen and potentially attracting Marcus's attention or questions. She settled comfortably on the bed, pulling her legs up beneath her, and immersed herself completely in the exercises. She pronounced words in careful whispers, checking her pronunciation through an app on her phone with earbuds tucked discreetly in her ears. She loved this feeling, the knowledge that she possessed a secret, something entirely her own that Marcus knew nothing about and couldn't control. It was her small pocket of freedom in a world where everything else had long ceased to belong to her. About an hour into her study session, enthusiastic shouts from a sports commentator drifted in from the living room. Someone had apparently scored a touchdown. Kesha lifted her head and listened carefully. Marcus was commenting loudly on the play, probably talking on the phone with one of his buddies from work. She could distinguish his excited voice, his genuine laughter, the kind of laughter he hadn't shared with her in so very long. She sighed deeply and returned her attention to the textbook, trying not to dwell on how dramatically their life together had changed over the years. When they had gotten married 15 years ago, everything had been completely different. Marcus had been attentive, genuinely interested in her opinions and thoughts. Together, they had dreamed about their future, walked through the city in the evenings holding hands, made elaborate plans, and laughed at the smallest things. He had called her sunshine, and frequently told her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Kesha had believed every single word. She had been happy simply to be near him, listening to his ambitious dreams about advancing his career, owning a big house someday, and the children they would eventually have together. But over the years, something fundamental had shifted between them. Marcus had become harder, more self-assured, more rigid in his thinking. He had started earning substantial money and seemed to have decided that this financial success gave him the unilateral right to control every aspect of their shared life. Kesha worked as an accountant at a small local firm. Her salary was modest, barely enough to cover groceries and her personal expenses. Marcus never missed an opportunity to remind her, especially during arguments, that it was he who fed the family, paid the mortgage, covered the car payment, and funded their occasional vacations. "If not for me, where would you be?" he would say whenever they argued about anything of substance. In a rented studio apartment with 3 roommates, that's where. "You should be grateful." Kesha would stay silent during these accusations because, deep down in a place she rarely examined, she feared he might be right. That without him, she really wouldn't be able to cope with life's challenges. That she was too weak, too indecisive, too ordinary to make it on her own. They didn't have children, though not for lack of initial desire. At first, they had postponed trying, waiting for the right time, focusing on careers, dealing with the mortgage, completing renovations on their first apartment. Then, when they finally started trying in earnest, pregnancy simply didn't happen. Doctors had shrugged their shoulders after numerous tests. Everything appeared fine with both of them physically. But conception never occurred. Examinations, tests, uncomfortable procedures, it had all lasted more than a year and ultimately ended in nothing but disappointment and mounting medical bills. Over time, this painful topic had become something they silently agreed never to discuss. Secretly, in the quiet hours of the night, Kesha still dreamed of having a child. She would imagine tucking a baby into sleep, reading fairy tales in funny voices, teaching tiny feet to take their first wobbly steps. But she was terrified to voice these thoughts aloud, fearing that Marcus would say something hurtful again, that it was her fault, that she couldn't even accomplish this one fundamental thing that women were supposed to be able to do naturally. In recent months, an invisible wall had grown steadily between them, brick by brick. Marcus stayed late at work with increasing frequency, arriving home exhausted and irritable. At dinner, he would answer her attempts at conversation in monosyllables, his attention buried in his phone screen. Kesha tried desperately to start conversations, asking about his day at the office, sharing amusing stories about her own work, attempting to inject humor into their interactions. He would nod mechanically without truly listening, and within 5 minutes, he would retreat to the living room and the glow of the television. On weekends, he went fishing with friends or disappeared into the garage for hours, tinkering with tools and avoiding her company. Kesha tried everything she could think of to reach him, to bridge the growing chasm. She cooked his favorite dishes, his signature smothered pork chops with rich gravy, creamy mashed potatoes, and golden cornbread. She suggested going places together, to see a movie, visit the park, even just take a simple walk around the neighborhood. But he refused every overture. "I'm tired, Kesha. Let me rest, for God's sake. You don't understand what it's like to work hard all week and then have to provide an entertainment program for you on top of everything else." And she would retreat once more, swallowing her disappointment. She would wash the dishes, clean the apartment until it gleamed, and stand looking out the window at passers-by on the street, wondering when exactly everything had gone so terribly wrong. At what precise moment had they become complete strangers who merely happened to live under the same roof? She felt with growing certainty that she was losing him, or perhaps had already lost him long ago. But she didn't want to surrender without a fight. She couldn't bear to admit that 15 years of her life had been lived in vain, that their love had died without her noticing, that she was utterly alone despite sharing a home with another person. So when Marcus suddenly suggested one evening that they should start looking for a larger apartment, their cramped one-bedroom in an aging building on the city's outskirts had long since become inadequate, Kesha felt an unexpected surge of delight and hope. Maybe this represented a genuine chance for them. Maybe a joint project, a common goal that required them to work together, would bring them closer and resurrect what had once existed between them. A new condo, a fresh setting, a new chapter of their shared life. Maybe, just maybe, everything could still work out. They began browsing through real estate listings together. Or rather, Marcus looked through listings while she sat obediently beside him on the sofa and nodded at appropriate intervals. He would show her options on his tablet screen, and she would timidly express her opinion about whether she liked a particular layout, if the windows were well positioned for natural light, if the kitchen seemed functional and convenient. But he rarely took her input into account with any seriousness. "That one's too far from the subway station." He would dismiss her enthusiasm with a wave of his hand. "This one is completely out of our budget. Way too expensive. This neighborhood has a bad reputation. Nothing but trouble and crime there. Do you even understand anything about real estate values?" Over time, Kesha simply stopped arguing or offering opinions at all. She would sit silently beside him, staring at the glowing screen, thinking her own private thoughts about what their life had become. Weeks of fruitless searching turned into a full month, then longer. They attended viewings every weekend, at first with genuine enthusiasm and hope, then with increasing resignation and weariness. Every single time, something was fatally wrong with the property. The layout was awkward and impractical. The neighbors were demonstrably noisy. The building was far too old and poorly maintained. The courtyard lacked adequate parking. The price exceeded what they could comfortably afford. Marcus remained perpetually dissatisfied, nitpicking at the smallest details, arguing with increasingly frustrated real estate agents. Kesha grew tired of this endless, futile running around, of his constant irritation and negativity, of the overwhelming feeling that none of this mattered anyway. Sometimes it seemed to her that he was purposely seeking out flaws in every property so as not to actually purchase an apartment, deliberately delaying any final decision. But why would he do that? She couldn't understand his motivation. Then one evening, as she sat cross-legged on the bed with her textbook spread around her, practicing another complex grammar exercise, Marcus burst into the bedroom without warning. He didn't even bother knocking, just threw the door open abruptly. Kesha flinched violently and barely managed to slam her notebook shut, shoving it hastily under her pillow before he could see what she'd been studying. Her heart hammered wildly in her chest. What if he had noticed? What if her secret was finally exposed? "Kesha, look at this." He thrust his phone toward her, displaying a real estate listing, paying absolutely no attention to her flustered state or obvious confusion. "This is the one. This is it. 3 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet, excellent neighborhood, and the price is actually acceptable for once. A foreigner is selling it. Some German guy. We're going to view it tomorrow morning." Kesha caught her breath, relief flooding through her. It seemed he hadn't noticed anything suspicious after all. She took the phone from his outstretched hand and carefully scanned the detailed description. The condo genuinely looked impressive. Bright, spacious rooms with high ceilings, a large modern kitchen, 2 full bathrooms, and a glass-enclosed balcony offering panoramic views. The professional photographs were high quality and showcasing the property beautifully. It was immediately evident that the current owner took exceptional care of the place. The hardwood floors gleamed in the sunlight, the walls appeared freshly painted in neutral tones, and the furniture visible in the staged photos was solid and elegant, showing no signs of wear and tear. "It's beautiful," she said cautiously, examining each photograph carefully. "Why is he selling it if it's in such good condition?" He's returning to his home country. It says right there in the description. Marcus took the phone back from her hands, as if she had been looking at it far too long. He lived here for several years for work, some kind of contract position. Now the contract's ended and he's going back to Germany. I already contacted him and agreed on a viewing tomorrow at 11 in the morning. You'll come with me, right? Of course I'll come, Kesha answered automatically. Good, that's settled then. I really hope this option finally works out because I'm exhausted from running around every single weekend looking at unsuitable properties. He stretched his arms above his head and yawned widely. All right, I'm going to finish watching the game. Why are you sitting in here alone anyway? Just reading a little before bed. Trying to relax. Aha! He was already turning toward the door, his attention already shifting back to the television and whatever game was playing. Just don't stay up too late. We need to get up early tomorrow morning. He left the bedroom, closing the door behind him with a soft click, and Kesha remained sitting motionless on the bed, staring into empty space. A German seller. A foreigner who spoke the language she had been secretly studying for 8 months. Something sparked inside her mind, a sudden, unexpected idea. She pulled the notebook back out from under her pillow where she had hastily hidden it, opening to the last page where she diligently wrote down new words and useful expressions she encountered. Her knowledge of the language had progressed considerably beyond beginner level. She could now read simple texts with relative ease, understood dialogue in movies without relying on subtitles, and even tried writing short practice notes to reinforce her learning. Her online course instructor frequently praised her for her rapid progress, commenting that she possessed excellent pronunciation and a natural feel for the language's rhythm and structure. What if? The thought came to her suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, and it seemed simultaneously crazy and deeply tempting. What if, at tomorrow's meeting with the German seller, she didn't reveal that she understood his language? What if she simply kept quiet, played the role of the ignorant wife, and pretended not to comprehend a single word? Marcus had frequently bragged to friends and colleagues that after several business trips to Europe, he had significantly improved his conversational German. He had traveled to Berlin and Munich multiple times for work-related conferences, communicated with international partners, reviewed and signed contracts in both languages. He would undoubtedly speak to this German seller in his native tongue, probably to establish rapport and demonstrate his sophistication. And if Kesha remained silent, pretending ignorance, she would be able to hear absolutely everything they discussed, without filters, without Marcus's selective translations, without his inevitable spin on whatever was said. Everything that Marcus might prefer not to tell her, every detail he might conveniently omit or deliberately misrepresent. Why did she feel she needed to do this? Kesha couldn't fully articulate the answer to that question, even to herself. Something instinctive inside her insisted it was necessary. Some vague but persistent anxiety, an intuition she couldn't quite name, a sixth sense warning her of danger. Call it whatever you wanted. Women's intuition, gut feeling, paranoia. Maybe she simply wanted to verify whether Marcus was being honest with her about important matters. Maybe she was exhausted from constantly being relegated to the sidelines of all significant decisions and desperately wanted to know the unvarnished truth for once, not filtered through his particular interpretation or edited for his convenience. Or maybe, on some level, she just wanted to use her secret knowledge at least once in her real life, to feel that she wasn't as simple, helpless, and foolish as he seemed to believe. She eventually went to bed, but sleep eluded her for hours. Marcus snored heavily beside her, sprawled carelessly across 3/4 of the mattress. Kesha lay on the very edge as she always did, afraid to move or shift position for fear of waking him and triggering his irritability. When Marcus didn't get adequate sleep, he became especially unpleasant to be around. She stared into the darkness of their bedroom and thought anxiously about the next day. A strange mixture of excitement and apprehension churned in her stomach. What would she actually hear tomorrow? And more importantly, was she genuinely ready for whatever she might discover? What if it turned out to be something terrible, something shocking, something that would shatter her world so completely that she could never return to her former life. But her former life was already unbearable anyway, she thought with sudden clarity. What could possibly be worse than feeling unwanted, invisible, and useless every single day? In the morning, they left the apartment early. The condo they were viewing was located on the opposite side of the city, in a new and increasingly prestigious neighborhood. In the car, Marcus remained intensely focused on driving, navigating the morning traffic in silence, only occasionally throwing out dissatisfied comments about the congestion and how nobody around here knew how to drive properly. Kesha gazed out the passenger window at the passing buildings, playing out possible conversation scenarios in her head on an endless loop. She felt genuinely scared. What if she failed to understand the spoken language when she heard it in actual live conversation, delivered at natural speed with colloquialisms and local accent? What if she became confused and inadvertently gave herself away with a reaction or expression? What if this entire scheme was utterly stupid and she was working herself up over absolutely nothing? "Why are you so deep in thought?" Marcus suddenly asked, glancing sideways at her as they paused at a red traffic light. "Your face looks sour. Don't tell me you already don't like the apartment and we haven't even seen it yet." "No, I like what I saw in the photos. I'm just thinking, what if something doesn't work out again? What if there's some problem we haven't anticipated?" "Don't stress yourself out unnecessarily. It's a genuinely good option this time. I thoroughly checked everything, the legal documents, the ownership history of the condo, everything. It's all completely clean and legitimate." He paused, then added with a note of condescension, "Don't worry about the details. If anything comes up, I'll translate everything for you. You understand. With foreigners, you always have to be extremely careful. They might try to take advantage of us or pull some kind of scam. These Europeans can be tricky. They think Americans are all naive suckers." Kesha remained silent, clasping her hands tightly together on her knees. "You'll translate," she thought with sudden bitterness. "The real question is exactly what you'll choose to translate and what you'll conveniently hide from me." They parked near an impressive modern high-rise building with a sleek glass facade that reflected the morning sunlight. The lobby was immaculate and clearly expensive, with a professional concierge stationed behind a polished counter, a sophisticated intercom system, and multiple surveillance cameras discreetly positioned. On every floor, the elevator hallways featured comfortable leather sofas and tasteful paintings hung on the walls. The air carried the subtle scent of expensive air freshener. Marcus looked around with obvious approval and nodded with satisfaction. Not a bad place at all. Very promising neighborhood. The property values here will definitely continue to increase. The entire area is being developed with luxury housing. This would be a profitable long-term investment. Kesha didn't respond, following him silently toward the elevators. They ascended in a swift, nearly silent elevator with mirrored walls on all sides. Kesha caught her reflection and barely recognized herself. Pale face drained of color, tense lips pressed into a thin line, hands nervously clutching her purse strap until her knuckles showed white. She looked frightened, hunted. "Pull yourself together," she thought sternly. "You need to act calm and natural. Just keep quiet and listen carefully. Just be yourself, the quiet, invisible wife who never interferes in anything important. You've played this role for years. You can do it one more time." The elevator doors opened smoothly onto a corridor with plush carpeting that muffled their footsteps. Marcus checked the apartment number on his phone screen and stopped at the correct door. Kesha felt her heart pounding so wildly she feared he might actually hear it. This was it, the moment of truth. Now she would have to convincingly play a role, to pretend ignorance, to deceive through silence. Could she actually manage it? Would she give herself away with an accidental word, an involuntary facial expression, an unconscious gesture that revealed comprehension? Marcus pressed the doorbell. Footsteps could be heard approaching from inside the apartment, confident, unhurried, the gait of someone comfortable in their space. Kesha took a deep, steadying breath, trying desperately to calm her racing thoughts and pounding heart. "Everything will be fine," she told herself firmly. "You'll simply listen. You'll learn the truth. There's nothing morally wrong with that. You have a right to know what your own husband really thinks." The lock clicked decisively and the door swung slowly open. On the threshold stood a man who appeared to be in his early 50s, tall and fit with graying hair styled conservatively and attentive gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at a glance. He was dressed impeccably in a crisp light blue shirt and well-tailored dark trousers, looking both professional and welcoming. He smiled warmly and extended his hand first to Marcus in greeting. "Kurt Weber," he introduced himself with only a slight German accent, and then immediately switched to his native language, obviously recognizing or assuming that Marcus would understand him. Kesha tensed involuntarily but fought to keep any reaction from showing on her face. She heard and understood every single word, the polite greeting, the gracious invitation to enter, the apologetic comment about some slight disorder in the apartment, though from what she could glimpse, everything appeared perfectly organized and spotless. Marcus replied in the same language, speaking briskly and with obvious confidence, introducing himself with a firm handshake. Then he carelessly gestured in Kesha's direction with barely a glance. "This is my wife, Kesha. She doesn't speak your language, so I'll translate everything important for her." Kurt turned to face her directly, smiled pleasantly, and extended his hand in greeting. Kesha shook it briefly, returned his smile with what she hoped looked like shy confusion, and quickly lowered her eyes, deliberately portraying the image of a woman uncomfortable with foreign languages and international interactions. Inside, everything tightened with almost unbearable tension. So it had begun. The deception was now active. She was no longer simply an observer or participant. She was a silent witness, an invisible woman who supposedly understood nothing of substance. "Please come in," Kurt said warmly, opening the door wider and stepping aside with a welcoming gesture. They entered a spacious, well-lit hallway. Kesha looked around with genuine appreciation, taking in every detail. Beautiful lightwood flooring extended throughout. A massive built-in closet occupied an entire wall, an ornate mirror hung in an expensive-looking frame, and soft, diffused light emanated from modern ceiling fixtures. The air smelled pleasantly of cleanliness with just the faintest aroma of fresh coffee brewing somewhere deeper in the apartment. Kurt led them further into the main living area, and Kesha couldn't suppress a small involuntary gasp of admiration. The living room was enormous, featuring floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows that offered a breathtaking view of a tree-filled park and a river glinting in the distance. The furniture was contemporary yet inviting, a large, comfortable gray sectional sofa, a coffee table artfully constructed from glass and natural wood, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves along one wall, densely packed with books and interesting souvenirs from various countries. "Beautiful," she couldn't resist saying aloud in English, her voice soft with genuine wonder. Marcus casually translated her comment to Kurt, but added something extra in German that made Kesha's attention sharpen immediately. She listened with intense focus and caught exactly what her husband actually said. "The wife is impressed, naturally, but will still need to determine if it's actually worth the asking price." Kurt laughed good-naturedly, nodded in understanding, and began conducting a proper tour of the apartment. They walked slowly through each room in turn. The master bedroom featuring a king-sized bed and its own spacious walk-in closet, the second smaller bedroom that Kurt used as a home office with a desk position to take advantage of natural light, and finally the open-concept kitchen with top-of-the-line modern appliances and elegant marble countertops. Kurt explained details about the apartment's features, the building's amenities, and the surrounding neighborhood's advantages. Marcus translated in brief, selective snatches, but Kesha noticed with growing concern that he was systematically omitting significant details or deliberately changing the emphasis of what was being said. When Kurt mentioned enthusiastically that the building had truly excellent professional management that resolved any maintenance issues with impressive speed, Marcus translated dismissively to Kesha, "The management company is so-so, apparently, but tolerable enough." When the owner described the neighbors as quiet, highly educated people, professors, doctors, successful business owners, Marcus grunted to Kesha, "Neighbors are just regular folks." Haven't had any particular problems with them. Kesha remained completely silent, pretending to examine the quality of the finishes, admiring the carefully chosen furniture, and gazing out the windows at the stunning views. But bewilderment and something darker, suspicion perhaps, grew steadily inside her. Why was Marcus systematically distorting Kurt's words? Why was he downplaying the obvious merits and advantages of this beautiful apartment? She couldn't understand his motivation. Perhaps he simply wanted to drive the negotiation price down by appearing less interested than he actually was, demonstrating to the seller that he had other options and wouldn't be easily impressed. That would be a normal negotiation tactic. They eventually returned to the spacious living room after completing the full tour. Kurt graciously offered coffee, and Marcus accepted readily. Kesha perched on the very edge of the comfortable sofa, folding her hands primly in her lap, consciously trying to make herself as inconspicuous and unobtrusive as possible, to become invisible, as she had learned to do so well over years of practice. Kurt disappeared into the kitchen, and she could hear the sophisticated coffee machine humming to life, followed by the pleasant clinking of expensive cups and saucers. Marcus paced restlessly around the room, examining the titles of books on the shelves with apparent interest, studying framed photographs on the walls that showed Kurt in various locations around the world. "Well, do you like it?" he asked Kesha in English without bothering to turn around and face her. "Very much," she answered with complete honesty. "The apartment is absolutely wonderful." "Yeah, not bad at all." He scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Although I think the price is significantly inflated. We'll definitely have to negotiate that down considerably." Kesha wanted desperately to say something, to ask why he was being so negative when the apartment was clearly worth the asking price, but she remained silent, biting back her words. Kurt returned moments later carrying a polished wooden tray holding 3 cups of aromatic coffee and a small plate of what looked like homemade cookies. He placed everything carefully on the glass coffee table and settled into the comfortable armchair positioned opposite them. Kesha took a cup with a grateful nod, not trusting herself to speak. The coffee was strong and aromatic, clearly real, freshly ground beans, not instant powder from a jar. Kurt spoke again, this time in a noticeably more serious tone that made Kesha's attention sharpen. She listened with absolute focus, not wanting to miss a single word. He explained that he had lived in this apartment for nearly 3 years. He genuinely loved this place, he said, his voice warm with affection, but his employment contract with the local company had reached its conclusion and he needed to return home to his family in Germany. His wife and their adult children had remained there throughout his assignment and missed him terribly, he added. He spoke with obvious warmth tinged with unmistakable sadness, saying it was genuinely difficult to part with the apartment, but circumstances left him no real choice. Marcus listened with apparent attention, nodding at appropriate intervals, then provided Kesha with an extremely brief, stripped-down translation. "He says he's leaving because of work. His contract ended." Kesha frowned internally, her suspicion deepening. Why hadn't Marcus mentioned Kurt's family? Why had he completely omitted the emotional context, the fact that Kurt was sad to leave, that he had a wife and children waiting for him? These human details made the owner more real, more trustworthy, more sympathetic. But Marcus apparently didn't consider any of that information necessary or relevant to convey to his wife. The conversation shifted naturally to discussing the specific details of a potential transaction. Kurt named his asking price clearly and without hesitation. It was undeniably high, but appeared entirely fair and reasonable for such a well-maintained condo in such a desirable and rapidly appreciating neighborhood. Marcus frowned dramatically and shook his head with exaggerated skepticism. "Too expensive," he said bluntly to Kesha in English, then immediately switched back to German and launched into aggressive bargaining with Kurt. Kesha sat motionless, observing their exchange with growing unease. Marcus spoke assertively and forcefully, citing what he claimed were compelling arguments to justify a lower price. "The real estate market is extremely unstable right now. Property values are dropping across the city. We have several other significantly cheaper options we're seriously considering." Kurt objected with quiet but unmistakable firmness. The apartment was demonstrably in excellent, move-in condition. The neighborhood was genuinely prestigious with strong appreciation potential. All legal documents were completely clean and transparent. They could move in immediately after closing without any renovations or repairs needed whatsoever. Marcus didn't back down even slightly, boldly offering a price 20% lower than the asking amount, an almost insulting discount. Kurt shook his head with polite regret, explaining calmly that such a dramatic discount was simply too large. He couldn't possibly agree to that without taking a substantial financial loss. Kesha sat clutching her coffee cup in both hands, feeling increasingly superfluous and irrelevant, as if she wasn't actually present in the room at all, as if this wasn't about her future apartment, not her future home, not her life being negotiated. She was merely decorative, a silent extra in a play where all the significant roles had already been assigned to others. The back-and-forth bargaining continued for approximately 20 minutes, both men gradually adjusting their positions. Finally, they reached a compromise price, moderately lower than Kurt's initial asking price, but not so dramatically reduced that he would suffer a genuine loss. The two men shook hands firmly, both appearing satisfied with the negotiation outcome. Marcus broke into a genuinely pleased smile. "We've reached an agreement," he told Kesha with unmistakable pride. "I managed to negotiate a very good discount. See how you have to talk to these people. You need to be firm and not show too much interest. They soften up immediately when they realize you're not some naive fool they can take advantage of." Kesha smiled weakly in response, the expression feeling false and strained on her face. Kurt said something else in German, and Kesha immediately perked up, her entire body tensing as she listened with laser focus. He was proposing that they discuss additional details, specifically when to conduct the official closing, what documents would be required, how best to structure and draft the purchase contract to everyone's advantage. Marcus nodded with interest, agreeing readily that yes, all these important details absolutely needed to be discussed thoroughly and carefully. "You understand," Kurt began, addressing Marcus directly in a more confidential tone, and Kesha felt her blood turn to ice. Transactions like this one are often better when structured simply and straightforwardly. Less complicated paperwork to manage, fewer tax implications in my home country. I can certainly help facilitate the process with the documents. I have an excellent notary contact here, very reliable, very efficient. He can handle everything quickly and cleanly, ensure all the paperwork is properly executed. Marcus leaned forward with obvious interest, his attention fully engaged. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Well, for example," Kurt spoke calmly and casually, as if discussing nothing more significant than the weather forecast, "you could structure everything with just one owner's name on the title initially. It's genuinely simpler that way, fewer complications with the bank, with the various filings and registrations. You can sort out the ownership details within your family later if you need to add your wife to the deed. I actually did it exactly that way with my own real estate holdings here. First, everything registered solely in my name, then I quietly and efficiently distributed the shares later among family members. It's convenient and financially beneficial from a tax perspective." Kesha felt everything inside her go absolutely cold, as if ice water had been poured directly into her veins. She gripped her coffee cup so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white, the ceramic warm against her palms. Register everything in one owner's name. In Marcus's name exclusively, without her. Without her name anywhere on the legal documents. Marcus remained silent for a long moment, as if seriously considering this suggestion with an open mind. Then he slowly nodded with evident interest. "That does sound quite reasonable, actually. Why unnecessarily complicate the process? I'll definitely think about that option carefully." "Of course, the final decision is entirely yours to make," Kurt spread his hands in a gesture of diplomatic neutrality. "I'm simply sharing my own experience with similar transactions. You certainly have adequate time to think it through thoroughly. I can send you my notary's contact information whenever you'd like. He can explain the process and benefits in much more detail if you're genuinely interested." "Yes, please send that contact information," Marcus replied with clear interest. Kesha sat completely motionless, desperately fighting not to betray any emotional reaction whatsoever. Inside, a violent storm raged. Shock, betrayal, mounting rage, creeping despair. Everything mixed into one suffocating lump lodged somewhere in her throat, making it genuinely difficult to breathe normally.